No matter who you are or where you live or what kind of personality you have experienced what it feels like to be in an argument. See, I was a bit of a quiet child, and I didn't really find much use in getting loud and angry with people, but my brother, on the other hand, now, he was the argumentative type. I think if any time that he had some free time, him and my mom would bark at each other and would argue and argue and argue until both of them both exhausted their points or they just didn't want to argue anymore. Maybe you're the quiet type or the argumentative type. Maybe perhaps you're a wordsmith of sarcasm and you just don't know how to let things go. Everyone has their own way in which they fight. In the same way, nearly everyone has something they want to fight for, a subject that gets them ready to throw down. We do this on social media, we do this with other people. Maybe there's a topic that gets thrown out there. Disclaimer, this is not something that I agree or disagree with, but I'm just using this for discussion purposes. Marching band shouldn't or should be considered as an athletic sport. I think most of us would have a different side to this kind of argument. Other topics like masks or no masks, Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, TikTok should be banned or shouldn't be banned, just to name a few things to argue about. I could throw anything about politics, religious arguments, anything that gets us into sparky conversations that end up in heated conversations. You see, we all have subjects that we care about and trigger conversations that make us want to scream. Everyone has an opinion, and sometimes those opinions bring out the fight in us. And I think we all know from experience that arguments and fights don't stay contained in harmless conversations or less personal conversations. Sometimes those arguments get pretty heated. Our worlds are full of arguments and the options are endless. Maybe you're arguing with your parents that you want more freedom. Or maybe you're arguing that you should get the spot on the team or in the band. Or who has actually more work to do around the house. Or maybe there's even other discussions that you're getting into, like who will win the election, or who should win the election, what people should do about guns, or human trafficking, or equal rights, or women's rights, or anything else. For most of us, tension arguments, they bother us. In fact, they're pretty annoying. Maybe some of you are just like, whatever, I'm not even going to argue about this, because you have enough to worry about in life without getting into any serious arguments. When the world around you is in constant conflict, most people tend to do three things. One, they go straight to anger. They automatically pick a side and get angry because the other side exists. So you fight and try to change them or prove that your side is right. Number two, you feel torn. You don't really know which side to take, and you're not sure whether a lot of the arguments are right or wrong. You're able to see both sides, and with so many people angry about it, you wonder if you should be angry too. Or number three, you just couldn't care less. You're just here to watch the fight go down, and you're happy just not to be involved in the drama for once. On a personal note, I think I'm number two. I think there's a lot of arguments where I feel torn, I see both sides, and I'm not sure if I should be angry about those things or not. When we really get involved in an argument, we all just want one thing: to win. That's our ultimate goal. We all have a few tactics that we've practiced to help us do that. Whether you win through yelling, or through silence, or through ghosting the conversation, or just showing up to fight, talking to the person or talking about the person so everyone knows how wrong they are. But we all have the same goal in mind, and that is to win. This has never felt more important than it does right now. Whether in our homes or on social media or in the culture that we observe around us, we are surrounded by big questions with big arguments. Are we for or against, anything? With that in mind, in a time with unavoidable arguments, what are we supposed to do? How can we get better at arguing, or how do we win? We're going to look at this passage in James, which is a book in the New Testament. And James was the brother of Jesus. What, you didn't think Jesus and his siblings didn't get into arguments? I think they did more than we think we do, And if, when they did, I want to be in that room when Jesus and his siblings were arguing. Like, would James say something so stupid and then Jesus would just throw out a piece of knowledge and just shut everybody up? I don't know. Anyway, what makes James so interesting is that he didn't grow up thinking that Jesus was the Son of God. He grew up thinking Jesus was his older brother. When Jesus left home and he started ministry in the Judean countryside, traveling all over the world, telling people about who God is, what did James do? Dude, he stayed away. It seems like James had zero interest in knowing what his older brother was doing or what he was up to. And honestly, I can't blame him. I mean, can you imagine your older sibling, or if you have an older sibling, walking around acting like they were God? Maybe they already do, I don't know. But maybe that's a different story. The point is, we can assure James responded that way because they were siblings, And that's why it's interesting to read what James has to say about conflict and tension and convincing others that you're right. James writes this in chapter 1, verse 9. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Now hang on to that for a second. James probably spent some of his time doing what most of us would have done with our siblings, being quick to anger and slow to listen. But what we read in the Gospels, James wasn't super supportive of what Jesus was doing, and I could even imagine that James himself was probably quick to tell others that his brother was crazy because he's starting a cult out in the countryside. Or he was quick to tell Jesus that there's no way that he could be who he claims to be. Or he was quick to defend what he thought and why he thought Jesus was wrong. Maybe he was also quick to try and convince everyone else that James was right and Jesus is just silly. And there must have been a moment, of course there had to be a moment, where James began to realize that his brother wasn't acting like God, that he was God in a body, that he was who he claimed to be. And this changed his mind about who Jesus was, and when he saw him for who he really was, it put everything else in perspective, including conflict. See, James instructed us to listen first. Whether you are right or whether you are wrong, listen first. Whether you know the whole story or you don't care about the whole story, listen first. Whether you have a great clapback ready or you just want to or not, listen first. No matter the situation, the response should always be the same: to listen before anything else. I'm going to say that again. Listen before anything else. Hear things from the other person's perspective. Listen first with the intent of hearing instead of trying to change someone's mind. And after we listen, James said that we should be slow to speak and slow to become angry. And this is important because it doesn't mean that we shouldn't speak at all. It doesn't mean that we should just sit back and take whatever someone throws at us. It means that we don't speak reactively. We pause. We take a deep breath and compose our thoughts and emotions before speaking. I think the majority of us listening have all been in positions where we didn't pause. When what we said, what we texted, what we yelled, what we posted on social media, we regret. Slow to speak and slow to anger means that we don't let our emotions determine our reactions. And when we do speak, we do so purposely in a way that is honorable. I was speaking with a friend a few weeks ago about issues that she had, and she had posted those issues online. And we talked about why she was upset and why she posted in such an angry way. I wasn't in that conversation to assert her that she was wrong, but to listen to her case and to tell her that she was there to speak and to understand that we get to choose the fights that we want to fight and how we fight them. That we get to choose how we react when we get into arguments. We all know what it's like to be quick to speak and quick to become angry. And I think back of the times that made me angry. And I question, what were the things that I got so worked up about? And then I think, are those things important to me now, in my day-to-day life? And do they even matter at all? Well, not really. And I bet those arguments would really seem kind of silly now. But you know what's important? The people you were arguing with. Your siblings, your parents, your grandparents, your step-parents, your friends. They matter now. And even if they aren't in your life anymore, they matter because they're people. They are people in your life who are around you. In other words, often the people we're fighting with matter far longer than the thing we are arguing about. You never win an argument if you lose the relationship. That's a big takeaway from today. You never win an argument if you lose the relationship. We are right in the middle of a time when tensions are high and conflict is normal. In fact, conflict feels constant. Arguments about playing out in our homes, and our friendships, our schools, about schools, in our culture. And when conflict is everywhere, the temptation is to ask, how do I win the argument and prove that I am right? And that's the wrong question, I think. Maybe instead of asking, how do I win an argument, the question should be, how do I win this relationship? How can I talk about this in such a way that even if we don't agree, even if, I can never convince them on what I think, that we can still have peace. Maybe we don't have to be friends, but as long as there isn't conflict between us. Even if I'm not okay with their opinion, with their lifestyle, with how they speak, is there a way that we can be okay? Maybe not always, but if there is, then that's a win. And the slight change in the question makes all the difference in the world, because it is no longer about making the other people realize that they are in the wrong. It's about making the other person realize that their relationship with you matters more than the disagreements you have with them. This may not fix everything, and I didn't just talk for 12 minutes to fix all your problems at home. No, none of this is easy. Real talk, figuring out how hard it is to handle arguments or conflict or disagreements, it's been one of the hardest parts about being a human being. I'm sure it is for you. I mean, it's not easy for anybody, but here's a few tips that I think would help us to make conversations within our conflict easier. One is this. Memorize that verse, James chapter 1, verse 19. Memorize this. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. If we want to respond to arguments and conflict differently, then we need a new technique. Just like song lyrics, when you memorize, it's the same when you memorize scripture, it gets in your head and helps you to think differently. And it doesn't take long. In fact, you can do it together right now. You could read that on the screen and read that at home, or read that as you're walking, not as you're driving, but read it wherever you are. To read that verse, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Second is this. Pause and pray. Nothing helps us to be slow to speak like pausing to pray for the other person. When we pray for someone, it changes how we think about them. Our brain naturally puts people in categories, but when we decide to pray for them, it forces us to see them as more than just one trait or one argument. It helps us to remember that they are human who probably wants the same thing as we do. And which brings me to my next point, empathize. Empathy is what happens when you put yourself in other person's shoes. Whoever you disagree with usually has more to their story than you know about. There's more to their opinions or their beliefs, but it's hard to remember that if we don't pause and listen to their story before responding, it's challenging yourself not to respond until you've thought long enough that you can clearly state how they feel in the way that you would agree with. Usually, if you talk about the issues from their point of view, you can empathize even if you disagree. Now, we may not be able to change the people, how they behave, and when it comes to conflict and arguing or fighting, but we can change how we behave when we see those situations differently. Conflicts are not easy. We want to argue, we want to prove ourselves right and explain how they are in the wrong. But you got to remember, it's not about winning the argument, but about winning the relationship. You can still have peace even if you disagree. Take some time this week to read over some parts of James. And it's actually a pretty solid book about real world stuff. And if you do happen to get into any arguments, come back and listen to this podcast again and think about what we have talked about today. Thanks for tuning in today to the United Home Podcast. This will be our last discussion for a while as we focus on transitioning to in-person gatherings and Google Hangouts. So for those of you who listen during the week, I appreciate it, but we're not going to be here for a while. On September 2nd, United Home will be transitioning to Unite Inside, where middle school and high school groups are invited to come out to our in-person gatherings. And if that makes you uncomfortable, we will have online options available. So our first gathering will be September 2nd here at the church. Students will need to wear masks and have hand sanitizer and will be seated 6 feet apart because these are the protocols we have to keep everyone safe. And then the following week on September 9th, we will be meeting on Google Hangouts. So this is something different that we've never done before, but we will be meeting from in-person and online every other week. So we're going to work with this because these are the new things we have to try because of this COVID thing. So anyway, keep in touch as more info will be sent out through messages and Facebook stuff. Students will need to continue to follow the Band app and stay connected with all things Unite when things are happening. So anyway, everyone who tunes in with us, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all of you. My guests who have been part of they've been reading scripture verses for me. You make this feel a little bit more at home. It doesn't feel like that we're separated. So to everyone, whatever you are doing, whatever it is, wherever you are, I hope you're doing okay. Have a great week, everyone, and I will see you all next time.